Hey, good morning, Facebook. This is Brett Coconatus with New Mexico Democrats for Democracy. And today I have with us two sheriffs from the Sheriff Association, Sheriff Mace and Sheriff Ferrari, as well as Jeff Apodaca. And we're here to talk about the new gun laws that just passed in New Mexico, HB 8 and SB 328. One expands background checks, and the other one empowers the law to basically temporarily confiscate your weapon should you be deemed a threat to yourself or others. And there's been a lot of discussion about this in the media and on Facebook. One of the big topics is, is this constitutional? And both of the sheriffs have been speaking out on social media about their views on these issues. There's also been a conference call with Governor Grisham, and also you guys received a letter from the Attorney General about this issue. Is that right?
That is correct.
And can you tell us a little bit about your interactions with the governor and the attorney generals on this issue, and why the Sheriff's Association, or at least you two gentlemen, have come out against these new regulations?
Brett, I was invited by the chairman of our county commission to sit in on that particular phone conference. I was also invited by the mayor of the city of Grant to sit on that particular phone conference as well. And it really wasn't a conference. It was a muted discussion between the governor and the host of the actual meeting. So there was no real room. There was no room for. We weren't allowed to engage. We weren't allowed to question or have conversation. There were just a particular set of questions that for instance, the Association of the Counties were able to ask the governor that was important to communities across New Mexico. One was the mental health issues in our state. One was the economic development in our state, and the other question, the overwhelming question that was through commissioners was the Second Amendment issues, the gun control issues, and stuff like that. And that was the thing that was important on the municipality level that was asked of the mayors, and when that telephone conference took place as well.
So I know you guys have probably spent a lot of time digging into the details of these two bills. Can you tell the audience a little bit from the law enforcement side on how these two new pieces of legislation impact New Mexico exactly?
Well, I can probably take this one, Tony. Sure, no problem. So when you look at House Bill 8 and what that does, that has to do with background checks. So no longer are two citizens allowed to sell a firearm to one another, private sale. So as we all know, if you walk into any of your big box stores or a retailer to purchase a firearm, you have to undergo a background check. If you had a weapon, you want to sell it to a lifelong friend, you had the ability to do that. In addition to that, it also it expands out to gun shows. So now if you go to a gun show, an individual has an FFL license, ability to sell his gun, you are going to have to go through a background check for them, which you already had to. However, somebody walking around the gun show with maybe a rifle slung on their back and somebody sees it and says, hey, I'd like to purchase that, no longer are they able to do that without that FFL. So we as a Sheriff's Association, and myself personally as the Sheriff of San Juan County, the purpose of this bill was to help keep guns out of the hands of those that don't need them. That's the whole purpose. But as we know in law enforcement, these type of gun laws don't work. They don't work. In California, there was a study that came out with the Johns Hopkins Institute in partnership with the University of California that looked at a 10-year study of California's background check laws, very similar to what ours is, and it has zero effect on crime. So what we have now under this bill is a bill that really is just on the law-abiding citizen, requiring them to pay a fee now for them to sell a gun to one another. And it's just ridiculous. It doesn't help out law enforcement at all. And it's very frustrating that we weren't brought to the table when you're looking at laws that are supposed to help law enforcement. And they call it common sense gun control. It's not common sense not to bring the field experts and those who are going to be enforcing the laws to the table to develop this. And as we found out right there on the House floor, all they did was take Colorado's law and bring it straight to New Mexico with zero zero advice or recommendation from us as law enforcement and what we need to keep citizens safe.
Well, Sheriff, this is
Go ahead, Jeff.
Sheriff, this is Jeff Apodaca. Obviously, as a former gubernatorial candidate, I follow this very much. And being a Democrat, obviously, I think everybody kind of agrees on background checks. But my philosophy is it's a shame that our political leaders did not bring you to the table for advice or for conversations. But I'm a big believer of constitutional law, and I'm also a big believer of counties and cities and states kind of running themselves. My philosophy is that there's 27 counties or 26 counties, I believe, that have created Second Amendment laws, resolutions. I guess the question I have for you is, as sheriffs, how are you going to enforce the laws versus the state law when your own county is basically saying you not to? And Sheriff Mace, if you want to take that lead, and then I'd like to hear from Sheriff Ferrari.
Jeff, thank you for that question. It's an excellent question. And so when we talk about the universal background check, background checks are done by the federal government, the individuals that have the FFL license, the dealership license. We as sheriffs, we don't have access to that system. We don't have access to the federal NICS system. We don't do the background checks. There's no mechanism in place for law enforcement to do that. And now essentially you have the state saying this is a law that we enacted and we expect you to enforce it. Now, there's no mechanisms in place for us to enforce that. In fact, on the NCIC, when we use an NCIC query, all that tells us is if the gun is stolen or not stolen. It doesn't tell us where it was purchased at, who it belongs to, where it came from, or anything like that. Even if there was a scenario that arose where we would be able to use this particular law, it doesn't. And they made it a misdemeanor too. So that's where we come off saying that, as sheriffs, we have the discretion to choose which laws we want to use. Now, again, we want to make our community safe. We want to make the citizens in New Mexico safe. And this law does not do that. We've said it before. It's a feel-good measure. And then, when we talk about the constitutionality of it, in some of these rural areas of New Mexico, there is no place for somebody to go and do a private transfer. There are no gun dealerships. There are no firearms licensed dealers. So, we go to the right, a right delayed is a right denied. So some of these individuals, if they want to purchase we're talking about the law-abiding citizen. The criminal element, they're not going to go commit a crime or they're not going to think twice about committing the crime. Did I get a background check or did I not? And you have overwhelming citizens across the state of New Mexico that realize that this isn't a tool or this isn't something that's going to make them even safer. And I think it was important that our legislatures listened to that. And, I made the comment earlier, talk about factual-based stuff. When you go to a gun show, these are for the majority of the people there, these are licensed firearm dealers, businesses, companies. They're required to do the background check on the federal system already. And then you may have one or two private collectors in there that want to sell a firearm or trade a firearm or do something like that. But these are the law-abiding citizens. They're going to go to one of their buddies that's a gun dealer and say, hey, I want to sell this gun to this guy, but I don't know him. Is there any way you can background check for me? And they'll do it. I mean, we've tested the system. We've seen it happen firsthand. So, those things are happening. I think this universal background check, again, it doesn't do anything to fix the problem and the crime that we have in New Mexico. And not only that, studies show we should look from other people, from what other people are doing. California, Chicago, we just know that research and studies show that the background check doesn't impact crime. In this background check, they've even created basically a second-class citizen and left law enforcement exempt from it. Well, I have a problem.
No, understand. And Sheriff Ferrari, a question is, a lot of us, look, I think a lot of us support red flag laws, background checks, specifically with criminals or people that have been convicted and have some concerns. But the red flag laws, I've talked to many sheriffs across the board. My concern, is it enforceable at your level and putting a lot of pressure on the sheriffs? What's your perspective, Sheriff Ferrari, on that element of it?
Okay, Mr. Apodaca, are you talking about the red flag law that, keep in mind, that did not pass, or are we talking about background checks again?
Well, we're talking about background checks, but I know
Okay.
that a lot of the topic was tied to topics to the red flag laws or red
I would
flag
say
requirements.
yes, sir. I would say the majority of the reasoning behind the sanctuary counties for our Second Amendment was due to the red flag law. And, some
Right.
people criticized us as sheriffs, saying that we jumped the gun before these laws were even made it through the House and the Senate and on the governor's desk. I disagree, and I really want to point out how that became. So we as sheriffs, before the legislation, obviously we have our affiliate, we have our association, we had the opportunity to review these gun laws. And of course, the one that probably was the most unconstitutional we felt and the most heinous was the red flag law. So we really broke up all these laws that we were reviewing into three categories: whether they were unconstitutional, whether we felt they were unenforceable, or whether we felt they were overreaching. And we as sheriffs, we as the field experts, attempted to get our legislators to listen to us in the beginning so we could be called to the table and really help develop good law that's going to help law enforcement keep the streets safe, keep guns out of the bad guys' hands and keep them in the hands of the good guys. That's what we all want as New Mexicans, I believe. So once we as sheriffs came together and discussed these laws, we wrote a letter to our legislators. We were ignored. We went to Santa Fe. We were on the House floor. We attempted to contact those. And it was a bipartisan approach. Some sheriffs are Republicans, some are Democrat. I don't even know which ones are which. We don't discuss that. We tried to educate them on the floor. We were ignored. And we saw very quickly, watching these bills go through the House with very little debate or ignored debate, we knew that and we were told that these were going to be passed because it was on the governor's initiative, it was on her checklist, and it's what she wanted. So that's when we returned to our counties and we gathered our people, we gathered the citizens, though we represent, and we had to stand up. We brought our citizens together. And I'm thankful that we did that, because if it wasn't for the citizens of New Mexico, we would have never got those calls in the days following. Then they took us seriously. Then they wanted to listen. And finally, we started to get in some dialogue together. So as far, and I want to backtrack to that original question when we talked about background checks. Now you know why those sanctuary counties were put into place. We talked about our counties now having these resolutions. Keep in mind, our resolutions are that they will support us as sheriffs not enforcing any law that has been deemed unconstitutional. Well, obviously, it's going to take the Supreme Court to review these laws and come down to us as sheriff and say, yes, they are constitutional. That's what we're asking for, is better direction, rather than watching them go through the legislative process with little to no debate because they were just on somebody's checklist, and it violates our citizens' rights. And I'm not going to violate my oath by enforcing something that I clearly see as unconstitutional. So the other part of that question was, as far as background checks. Background checks, or the way this law is written, it's a secondary offense. So the purpose of this law is to keep guns out of bad guys' hands. However, I'm not going to know if somebody procured a gun illegally until after a crime has already been committed, and I have the opportunity to ask the offender, where did you get that gun? Now, keep in mind, we have no gun registry. So having no gun registry, it's been in the family for years. It's the equivalent of me driving down the road and trying to find out who has no insurance. I don't know. Till they create an offense, I stop and I'm able to ask them that question.
That's why I think a lot of our followers agree with you. I think everybody favors background checks, but no one that I've talked to, whether it's in the law enforcement or with even on the social media side, can see how sheriffs can enforce even the laws that were created. Now, a couple of things have come up on social media, and Sheriff Manny Gonzalez from Bernalillo, clearly he supports your guys' stance, but the county leaders of Bernalillo County is not one of the counties that have created this resolution. From your perspective, and I'd like to hear from both of you, from your perspective, what kind of position does that put Sheriff Gonzalez into that supports the other sheriffs, but his county leaders are saying you need to enforce the state laws? How is that going to affect Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department?
Jeff,
And I'll throw that to Tony first, and then
Okay.
Sheriff Ferrari, if you want to come back on it.
Jeff, that's a great question. And, Sheriff Gonzalez came out and said, hey, I support the Constitution. I support the Second Amendment. I do believe there's enough laws on the books that we currently to enforce those laws that we have. And what Sheriff Gonzalez is saying there, and it's the same thing that a lot of us sheriffs and law enforcement as a whole already know. What we need to do is bridge some of the gap between the federal laws and state laws, and work on making some of these laws mirror each other, and put the enforceability of them on a state level, so we're able to use them rather than rely on the federal government. Because again, they're short-staffed, they're under there's not a whole lot of resources there that we're able to tap into. Not only that, with the some of these cities that have the sanctuary cities on the immigration stuff, doesn't allow them to tap into federal resources and use some of those funds. So if we bridge that gap between some of the state and federal laws and put those back where we as law enforcement can use them on a state level, I think we'll really be able to impact crime. But as far as Sheriff Gonzalez and being at odds with his county commissioners, I know that puts him in a hard place, because the county commissioners ultimately they control the budget of the office of the sheriff, and that's pretty much it. The sheriff himself is elected by the people and answers to the people that elect him into office. So, I think my personal opinion, I think he's taken a strong stance on this. And, Albuquerque is unique to the rest of the state. I mean, they're responsible for 42% of the violent crime total of our whole state. So it is the most heavily populated county in the state as well. So they have a unique. There is an issue there, and that's where we need to focus our efforts on. Is what's going on in that particular part of our state? How are we going to best be able to impact crime over there? And every time you turn on the news, there's a shooting or a violent crime or something going on over there. And that's the important part of our association as the sheriffs is working to support each other and help each other out.
So I have a question for y'all.
Sheriff Ferrari.
Sorry.
Sure. No, first of all, I applaud the
I was
sheriff.
just say I was going to want to Sheriff Ferrari's. Yeah.
No problem.
Go ahead, Sheriff Ferrari.
Yes, sir. First of all, I applaud Sheriff Gonzalez, his stance on coming forward, even though it may have not been in line with what the commission was. He is the chief conservator of the peace in his county. Where each commissioner, they do have a certain district within his county. He is a chief conservator of the peace. And it's their decision, and just like it is any county commission's decision, whether to have the Second Amendment sanctuary counties. Again, I think they should be listening to their citizens as their citizens come up and make these requests. We're very fortunate in county government because we are the branch of government that's closest to the people. We have our ear to the people and what their needs are and where we direct our resources and our responsibilities. So I do applaud him for that. Do I think it puts him at odds with this county commission? As far as Sheriff Mace, I think his budget is directly tied to the county commission. However, he doesn't answer to the county. My hope was they wouldn't use that as a political pry bar, denying him funding or proper funding to have adequate resources and manpower to those citizens. And I truly don't think they'll do that. I also have to remember the governor was a former Bernalillo County commissioner. So there may be some allegiance there on the side of the county commissioners in supporting the governor, being that they have a direct relationship with her, and there's a lot of political avenues that open having that type of connection. I can understand that, but again, I think the sheriff of Bernalillo County did a phenomenal job as far as standing up and reasonably putting it that he has adequate laws to address these issues, that these laws will not help him. And as Sheriff Mace said earlier, these are just comfort laws. They're not going to do anything for us.
So my
You had a question?
I did. So HB 83, I think, was the red flag law, and SB 328, which was signed on April 4th by the governor, is almost kind of the same type of thing. It basically just states that, if there's any type of domestic violence or orders of protection, that individual can't have possession of a firearm or transport a firearm or anything of that nature. So in the eyes of the law, what is the difference, or is there a difference other than the fact that when I go seek an order of protection, that's technically kind of some type of due process procedure, right?
So Brett, with the current with that particular piece of legislation, what the association, of course, we want to protect victims of domestic violence. Of course, we want to make it safe for them. Do we think these aggressors need to have firearms? No, we don't. But currently, we have that prior to this piece of legislation being signed, we already had the authority to remove firearms from a suspected offender's home. So, number one, if we were dispatched to a domestic violence call and there was a weapon used in that domestic violence, we seize it as evidence, and there's due process there. So now, what happens with this particular piece of legislation is, or in the current law that was on the book is, if we thought there was a threat there or that individual was at risk, we could ask the judge of district court to give us a petition. Basically, when we serve those restraining orders, that we could seize those firearms as well, or have that respondent surrender them to a third party, either a family member not living in the home, a friend, or a gun dealer. Now, this is currently already a federal law. Again, this piece of legislation that was signed in is way overreaching, way extreme than the current federal law. And what it does is there's no due process in there. And our biggest concern of this piece of legislation, and this, it's so important to the Sheriff's Association because we are an office of the court. It's our responsibility and our role as the sheriffs to serve these orders and to make sure that they're carried out. So we want to make sure that that there's due process and that there is some type of probable cause, because that's what that's what we operate off of. And so when we get these orders that say, hey, go take these guns from the respondent, number one, we want to make sure that we're not disarming a potential victim that armed to make themselves safe and keep their attacker away. And not only that, we want to make sure that we have probable cause and there's due process. So under this current piece of legislation, if you commit a misdemeanor under the Misdemeanor Domestic Violence Act, basically, you don't even have to commit an act of violence. You can basically throw the wedding album in the fireplace, and now you can lose your constitutional right to carry a firearm for a year or longer. And then the judges are wanting us to go seize those weapons, or under this particular piece of legislation, this new law, you're wanting us to go seize those weapons before the petitioner has had his day in court or in front of a judge. Now it puts undue cost on the petitioner because he's already being held accountable when he hasn't had his day in court, or he hasn't even been in front of the judge yet to see if he's even guilty of committing a crime.
Makes sense.
Well, it's funny. It's funny, Sheriff Mace. My concern on the law enforcement side is it going to put a lot of sheriffs and deputies in fire and danger trying to enforce these laws? Which the law, the way it's written, I just see it's unenforceable.
Well, and that was one of the Shane, that was one of the biggest issues that we had with it, is it does put the law enforcement at risk. We've seen what happened in some of these other states that enacted these laws, and there was two red flag bills. There's a domestic violence one, and then there's the mental health one. They kind of commingle with each other. But both of those particular pieces of legislation were asking us to go seize firearms without any type of due process, and they're putting our law enforcement in risk. And a lot of people were saying, why did the sheriffs take such strong stance on this and not your other law enforcement agencies? We're the office of the court. We have to serve those paperwork. we have to serve those orders. So we're going to be the ones asking to put ourselves and our law enforcement officers and other citizens at risk. That's why it was so important for us to have a seat at the table and try to look at these particular pieces of legislation. Sorry, Shane. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries, no worries. No, when it came to the red flag law, Mr. Apodaca, we talked about that and the differences between that and House Bill 328. When House Bill 83, when we saw it in its form, what it directed, first of all, let's talk about household member. In the state of New Mexico, we have a very, very broad definition of household member, which extends all the way out to your former in-laws. That's right, your ex-wife's parents, that far out. Your ex-step-parent. That means your former stepmom. And obviously, these are relationships that may be contentious already just because of where they at and where they fall in your family. But these people are considered household members. So when they looked at, when they were developing or wherever they got the red flag law from, when we talk about household member, we have to use New Mexico's definition of that, not whatever state it came from, which may have been a little bit closer, maybe immediate family members. So with that allowed, under House Bill 83, it allowed a household member to go to the courts, and if they felt that their family member was a endangerment to themselves or others, they could file an affidavit, if you will, just like we do a domestic violence order, where they lay out their own information, give it to the judge. If the judge deems that it's credible, then it is then faxed or sent over to the sheriff's office for us to go over there and take that person's weapons or guns. Not only guns, but ammunition. And ammunition in the state of New Mexico is not regulated. Even if I took your 80,000 rounds out of your house and stuck them in my evidence locker, you can walk down to Walmart and buy more. So I don't even know why they put that in there. Again, sheriffs tried to educate them on this, and they ignored us. Okay? So what that would require us to do is to go over somebody's house, knock on their door, hand them this order saying, we are here for your guns and ammunition. You are going to have a hearing before a judge in the next 14 days. Now, it could be tomorrow, or it could be somewhere within that 2-week period, where you are going to have to go before the court. And the burden of proof is on you, not the state. These are civil orders. The burden of proof is on you, where you're going to have to go and you're going to have to fight for your Second Amendment right. So within that 14 days, you're going to have to go get an attorney, because there's not a court-appointed attorney, because this is a civil matter. So you got to go get an attorney. I'd recommend you go get a mental health evaluation in the next 14 days, whether you have insurance or not. But again, the burden of proof is on you. You probably want to go get a substance counselor to come to testify in your defense, because that's part of it, whether it was alcohol or drugs involved. So you're going to have to get all these people together at your expense to go and fight for your constitutional right that has already been taken away from you, because your guns and ammunition are currently being held by your sheriff's office. That is a violation of due process. Your Second Amendment. Your Fourth Amendment, a search and seizure. That is wrong. That is why we stood up against that in particular bill. Now, to talk about 328. Now, 328, the way I've read it so far, says that if there is a restraining order in place, when those individuals are called before the judge, and the judge deems that that person is a threat to the individual, he can require that individual to turn in his guns either to his local law enforcement or to an FFL dealer, okay, which law enforcement, as far as the taxing part on a lot of sheriff's offices, I'm lucky to have a large evidence room. However, it could be filled up very fast if I go and take the guns of a gun collector and all of his ammunition. Some sheriff's offices in the state, their evidence locker really consists of an old gym locker. That's all it is. So it does put a lot of undue stress on the sheriff's office. To include, we're responsible for any damage or anything else that happens to that weapon while it's in our care. So it causes some logistical issues on top of that. But that individual can also turn them over to the FFL dealer. Well, turning your FFL or your weapons over to FFL dealer is also going to for some cost. Can you imagine, just like you're renting a storage shed, what is it going to cost from an FFL dealer to keep your guns for a period of 1 year? So as sheriffs, when we were looking at this bill, and I do want to point out, originally they put in a bill that was pretty good and we could get behind. We would have liked them to add that you could maybe hand over your guns to a family member, maybe an uncle, dad, somebody else, because you can't be in possession of them. But it was a pretty good bill. But then it goes through the House and it turned into a really, really bad bill. And then it got watered down into just a bad bill is what we ended up with. And as Sheriff Mace pointed out, not only did it protect or in there, which we already had on the books, we already had current law that could help us with these matters. Now we just have an official law that lays out some of these things, but it starts to get really intrusive in the fact that what it also opened up is prohibitations on owning firearms. So as we all know, a felon can't have a firearm. We all know that that's federal law. Also under federal law, it says that that anyone convicted of a state domestic violence crime cannot have a firearm. But again, now let's look at New Mexico's definition. So under this law now, they have expanded those that no longer can have firearms to criminal damage to property, household member, misdemeanor. That means a criminal damage to property which is under $1,000. 18 kid goes and slashes the tires of his girlfriend. If he is found guilty of that misdemeanor, he can no longer own guns for the rest of his life. Now, clearly it states in there, as law enforcement, okay, to prove somebody is a felon in possession of firearm, I have to show that conviction within a 10-year period on a felony. On this misdemeanor, it's for life. That's wrong.
Let me ask you another question, which has been kind of popping up, and I'll throw it to Tony. I'll throw it to Sheriff Mace first. The governor and the attorney general has come out and said you guys are wrong, and they're going to force you into enforcing the new state law. What's your stance on that? Because is it political posturing between the governor and the AG, or are they going to have ramifications to come after all the sheriffs of the 26 counties that have passed these resolutions?
Well, I think it is a little bit of posturing. The letter that the Attorney General sent us is almost word for word verbatim what was sent out of Washington to the sheriffs there. And, the governor, our governor's our governor. We need to learn, both sides of the fence need to work together, and we need to have a dialogue between each other to be able to enact laws that are going to be able to protect the citizens in our state. During the campaign process, the governor had no problem coming and meeting with us at our sheriff's meeting. In fact, spent a good hour visiting.
In fact, if I recall, she asked for your guys' endorsements.
She did. And
she did.
She came to our association and met with the sheriff. We talked about what's important and stuff like that. And then when she gets elected into the office, it's dead silence. We're rogue. We're looking for a pity party. We're fear mongering, and that's not what we were doing. But again, that nobody gets on an airplane and says, "Hey, I hope it crashes." This is our governor. We need to give an open dialogue. We need to work with her. We need to figure out ways to protect the citizens of New Mexico. So, same thing with our attorney general. He's our attorney general, and as sheriffs. Again, we're the chief executive law enforcement officers in our respected communities. We answer to the people that elect us into office. We're going to stand by our oath of office and support the Constitution. We're going to follow what the citizens in our community. We know what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. And I think with the AG's letter, it's like you said, political posturing. No sheriff is going to put a citizen at risk. No sheriff is going to put a citizen at harm. No sheriff is going to openly allow their county to be sued and for civil liability, because we're responsible for the taxpayers' dollars as well, and we want to make sure that those monies are being used appropriately and not wasted in some lawsuits. And when you talk about even in the Attorney General's letter, he says that these bills are presumed constitutional. He doesn't himself come out and say, "Hey, they're constitutional." He says presumed. So we're in the same boat. We want these to be taken to the Supreme Court and say they are constitutional or they don't present any problems. But again, we as the sheriffs, we know which laws. These are constitutional rights, not a constitutional privilege. So when somebody has a firearm, we can't treat it like a driver's license type of deal, because that's a privilege, not a right. So when we talk about firearms and people's due process and different things, these are constitutional rights, not constitutional privileges. And again, that's where we're going to stand by our oaths. And we're going to support our citizens, and we're going to do what they want.
I want to throw something out because there's been a couple of questions on Facebook, like, have you tried to reach out to the governor and sit down privately one-on-one with her? And I just want to clarify for everybody, you have tried to do that from stage one. Is that correct?
That is correct. I mentioned the letter that we sent. I mentioned many sheriffs. We went down there and we tried to educate our legislators on the floor. We had sheriffs that attempted to have meetings with the governor. And even in this meeting or this teleconference, this really one-way teleconference that keep in mind, it was the Association of Counties that were having the dialogue with the governor only. The rest of the counties were able to just listen in on this conversation with the questions that they submitted. The overwhelming question from all the counties to the governor was, what are you going to do about working with our sheriffs? And she said, oh, we're going to have that meeting. We have yet to receive a phone call. Yet when she was on the campaign trail, she knew exactly where to find us. We're not hard to find. You could go to our website. Our numbers are on there. Pick up any phone, call a county, ask for a sheriff. We're not hard to find. And we do want to open up that dialogue. Again, the sheriffs here aren't being resistant to community protection, to following the law. We're not. What we're saying is, if you're going to be enacting law, talk to the professionals. If your car's broke and you're not a mechanic, you don't take it to the mechanic and tell him what to do and what tools he's going to need to fix it and hand him a pipe wrench. Right. No, what you expect him to do is look through the vehicle, say, this is what's wrong, this is what it's going to take to fix it, and this is what I need. Then we get it fixed. But again,
yeah, I just want to make it clear to everybody that your organizations and you individually, and I've heard from legislators too, have reached out to legislators, to the governor, to sit down and work within this to structure something that you guys can manage. Again, I go back to, over 80% of the counties have stepped up and said these laws are unenforceable and are wrong. So 81% of the counties are stepping up saying we need to sit down and discuss this. Clearly, there needs to be a sit-down private discussion with our political leaders.
Absolutely. Mr. Apodaca, I want to expand on that a little bit. It's not only 80% of New Mexico counties. What it is, it's rural New Mexico. Rural New Mexico is standing up finally and saying no more will the Rio Grande corridor make all the decisions for New Mexico. And that's what's happening. We have been ignored for years. If it wasn't to the benefit of Bernalillo County, Santa Fe County, and Doña Ana, we were flat out ignored. So if you look at all the counties that put this Second Amendment sanctuary county into play, it surrounds the Rio Grande corridor. Rural New Mexico wants to be listened to. I understand that Bernalillo County has issues, that APD has issues. Okay, they're under a consent decree, a federal consent decree, which pretty much means probation for a law enforcement agency. Yet, according to them, those are the only people they ask any questions to in reference to these laws. Well, right now they got the federal government's thumb on them right now to make sure they abide by every single thing they do. Right now they are paying a ton of money for advisors to be there. Well, it sounds to me that with the crime that's happened in Albuquerque, maybe you should see and check with the rural counties. We're not having these crimes. Maybe ask us what we're doing right, why we don't have the crimes that we have, why Albuquerque right now is number one in auto theft, why it's number one in larcenies. Look at their violent crime that's happening. I understand they have issues, but because they have issues doesn't mean you go ahead and push through law and make law that really is just for Albuquerque. My citizens don't have that problem.
And again, go ahead, Brett. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say I want to commend you on your response because that's exactly it, Sheriff Ferrari. Surrounding yourself with the experts in any of the process, and I know this is a very special and particular issue as far as legislation because you said it was a constitutional right. But we can see this time and time again throughout the session that I think leadership needs to spend more time reaching out to whether it's community leaders or business leaders or the problem solvers across New Mexico or the people with the experience such as yourself when considering this legislation. It's really disappointing to see people living in this bubble thinking that they have all the answers when they're not really in the field with the issue at hand. So I just wanted to give you some endorsement for that one.
Brett, you're right.
Let me Tony, we were talking before we started this about your guys' file petition with the Secretary of State's. I do want to cover that. Where's your stance on that? Where is that in the process?
So we all know that the first petition was turned in to the Secretary of State for the referendum on the universal background check. Secretary of State rejected it, said there were some problems in the format, and also that legislation doesn't violate the Constitution. So the that referendum was brought back. Some of those changes were fixed, and it was resubmitted to the Secretary of State. And then they have 10 days to answer back. Well, again, the Secretary of State reviewed that and rejected it again this morning. We got word that she rejected that referendum, basically stating that this House bill does not, that this universal background check doesn't violate the Constitution. Again, I don't think the Secretary of State has the opinion to say if it's constitutional or not. As a Secretary of State, our argument is she's allowed to adopt the format of the petition or approve the format of the petition. So I think the next step on this is I really don't know, but I would hope that they would some way find it to the legal system, to the Supreme Court, or a lawsuit be filed on that particular referendum. But Jeff, I want to rewind back to one other thing about reaching out to the Sheriff's Association and being able to reaching out to the Sheriff's Association and come to the table and have a meeting. Number one, the Sheriff's Association was present. We had a legislative representative from our association at the state capitol almost every day. We had sheriffs going up to the fourth floor trying to at Olive Branch. We also sent the letter. And during the conference call, the governor said that she won over law enforcement on these particular pieces of legislation. That's false. Even APD released a statement that says we as a body, law enforcement body, don't support these particular pieces of legislation. Even though our chief may do it, we don't. Overwhelming law enforcement come out and say we don't support these pieces of legislation. What she did have is a handful. She had the chief from Aztec Police, which Shane can talk to that since it's just right there in his community. She had the police chief from APD, the mayor of Albuquerque, and the sheriff from Santa Fe County and the sheriff from Doña Ana County. Well, that doesn't represent law enforcement as a whole. The other thing is immediately after that phone conversation, the Sheriff's Association did get an email to say, hey, we want to meet with you guys. When can we do that? To this day, we've sent 3 correspondences back saying we're willing to meet. When can we facilitate this? Where can we make this happen? No response back. However, the sheriff from Taos County, Jerry Holgrave, he did get an invitation to set up for a meeting. The associations of counties got a setup for a meeting, but the sheriffs still have not. So there's. I just want to make it clear that as the sheriff, I know what my staff is doing. I know what my guys are doing. If there's something going on in the community, somebody's being vocal about something, I know and I hear about it and I reach out to that individual and say, hey, what's your problem? Or what's going on? Or how can I help you? Our governor is elected to represent the state of New Mexico as a whole. Obviously, she's seen that we were at the state capitol. Obviously, she's seen everything that was going on in the news, social media, because she made comments about our association and individual sheriffs. That right there is enough to say, hey, get those guys up here and let's see what's going on. Let's talk to them. Our past governor, Donna Martinez, we had interest in this universal background check before. Day one, the former governor Martinez said, hey, you guys come up here in my office and meet with me and let's talk about this and let's figure it out. There wasn't name calling, there wasn't public criticizing or anything like that. It was a working effort between the association and law enforcement to try to enact a law that would actually do something and make people safe. I just wanted to add that to this day.
No, and I think, no, Sheriff, and I appreciate that because I know that's one of the things that we've talked about And again, let me tell you, I think what we all agree, and tons of people support, and I agree with you. I'm actually down in Las Cruces for a few days on business, and I've talked to people about this situation, and many law enforcement that I visit with, many people in Las Cruces and Doña Ana are not happy with the position that the Doña Ana County Sheriff has taken down here. So I think it's a split community in the counties that haven't come along with the other counties. I think it's split right down, whether it's party lines or right down things. But let me ask you a question, and I'll throw it to Shane. I'll throw it to you first. But what do you think the next step is for law enforcement? What do you think the next step is for you guys? If the governor won't sit down and meet with you, if this is law now, what do you guys think your next step is? And I'd like to start off with Sheriff Ferrari and then come back to you, Tony.
Mr. Apodaca, you're right. It is signed law by the government. And at some point, somebody's going to enforce this, and somebody's going to bring up a constitutional issue. And our hope is that it goes to the Supreme Court. Then we'll get our direction, whether it is constitutional or not. But the fact is, it is law now. But as you said earlier, it's very, very hard to enforce, if not impossible. Again, these are laws. You look at our background check law. The whole purpose behind it is not going to curb violence in New Mexico. It's a secondary offense. So as you've seen 9 times out of 10, where an individual is charged with homicide and felon in possession and another crime, and this one's a misdemeanor, it's going to get pled away. So the teeth in the bill is not going to deter any criminal. You're not going to see criminals in the back parking lot of Circle K exchanging a stolen firearm for maybe an ounce of methamphetamine and saying, you know what, I feel bad about this. We should probably go to an FFL dealer and get this, get a background check real quick. That's not going to happen. I know, shocked as it may be. I know I'm completely shocked that criminals don't follow the law. So again, now we have law-abiding citizens just having to go and find an FFL dealer being out $35. So what's going to end up happening is somebody's going to get charged with this. I mean, how? I don't know. Maybe APD does a sting at a gun show and finds somebody that exchanged a firearm without going through a background check. Why you would do a sting on a misdemeanor, I don't know, but let's say they do. And that is challenged before the courts. As far as the House Bill 328, I think the same thing's going to happen. I think you're going to have an individual that may be in a fight with his wife. She's co-owner of his vehicle. That's right. On the registration, it says Bob and Sally. And in a heated argument, he leaves because he doesn't want to commit any violence on her, walks out of his house and punches out his truck window. And she calls the cops. He's charged with criminal damage to property. He's convicted. Now he's lost his gun rights for life. And that big sticker on the back of it that says, he's an outfitter. Now he's lost his business and everything else. He's going to challenge that and saying, listen, this was a property crime, a misdemeanor property crime, and I lost my gun rights for life. And it's going to end up in the courts. My hope is that next year is, and I have no doubt that they are going to try to push the red flag law again next year, that we are called before the table. We're called there in front of the legislator, whoever's carrying this bill, and saying, what do you guys need? That we're able to analyze this. We're able to protect our citizens' rights, but at the same time, make sure those guns stay out of the hands of those that shouldn't have them. That's reasonable. We can understand that. But let's make sure we're upholding constitutional rights. As law enforcement,
well, and I think,
yes, we enforce law and we protect constitutional rights.
And I want to clarify with everybody, because, I've been monitoring since we announced we're going to do this. And I want to clarify with everybody, you're not totally against all these laws. You just want to be at the table to help implement some of these laws or structure it because you're the ones that are going to have to enforce it. Am I correct on that?
You're right. Just between me and Tony, we have over 40 years worth of law enforcement experience. Take 33 counties. Look at all that law enforcement experience. Look at our chiefs. We've seen it all. So why wouldn't you call the experts to the table and ask them again, what do you need to help with this problem? But no, New Mexico chooses just to plagiarize laws from other places. They told us flat out that this background check law, Senator Martinez was on the floor, said, I got this bill word for word from Colorado. We are not Colorado. We have our own constitution. We have our own citizens, our own problems, our own successes. Quit plagiarizing other people's laws and running them through the system just so you can put your name on it and say that you're the one that put this bill through. Why don't you coordinate? Why don't you really use some common sense in your common sense gun legislation and call the experts to the table? We'll tell you what we need.
Right. So, Tony, what do you think the next steps are? What's your vision? What do you think should be the next steps?
Jeff, I'm 100% with Sheriff Ferrari on this. I do agree that these laws are going to somehow make it to, we call it case law, and what that happens is some officer uses the law in the field, and then it takes it to court, and somebody gets it challenged, and then we come back with case law that makes it even harder for our jobs, because now not only do we got to worry about state law, we got to look at case law and see how those commingle with each other when we're prosecuting a case. When we're looking at right now, currently researching some of the laws, Warren versus DC and Castle Rock versus Gonzalez, trying to see how those two particular rulings, how they're going to affect more so the in regards to the Attorney General's letter on saying we have to enforce these laws and we have to use those laws and things like that, which we as sheriffs already know. And we already have laws in place we were currently using to get to the same place that we needed to be to protect citizens. We were using those laws, and they were making our streets safe. They were being prosecuted in court. They weren't being challenged by the Supreme Court. They weren't violating people's due process. They weren't against probable cause. And those are what we were using. And they weren't going through lawsuits, and cases were getting prosecuted. So as for me, I'm going to continue to use those particular laws that have already been deemed constitutional by the Supreme Court. And the new laws, I'm going to wait for somebody else to to use them and let them go through the legal process to find out, waste their citizens' tax dollars on that to see if they're constitutional or enforceable or right or wrong. Again, under the discretion, under the background check, the discretion side of it, I have the discretion to issue a lot of verbal warnings.
Well, it's funny, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think we have 126 laws on the books already, something like that. And again, you have a lot of support out there. I think we all have you all have a lot of support out there. We will continue pushing to make sure that we're pushing for you all and making sure, hopefully, that our legislators and our governor listens to you. Brett, is there anything else that we haven't covered?
No, I think that's it. I mean, Sheriff, this has been a great discussion. It's always good to get it from the other side as well, and hearing, things that are not coming out of the media, the primary media and social media. And I applaud you for your efforts. I'm sure this is not going to be the end of the debate, and I look forward to having you guys back on here so that we can continue to inform New Mexico about these situations.
Yeah, one last thing. Is there anything that Tony, Shane, is there anything that we haven't covered that you guys wanted to make sure you covered on this topic?
Brett, I'm sorry, Jeff. I'd like to just add on the totality of this whole conversation is, again, we as sheriffs, and I didn't answer the question properly, but we as sheriffs, we as law enforcement officers, our number one priority is to make our community safe and protect the citizens. And what we want to do is be able to enact laws that are usable, enforceable, and do that. And that's the most important thing that we want to take from this is let's allow the professionals to come to the table and try to have a say-so in the way that some of these pieces of legislation are drafted. How are they going to impact? How are they going to impact crime in our communities? How are they going to make people safer? How are we going to be able to use these on the streets? Collectively, between the 33 sheriffs in New Mexico, you have hundreds and hundreds of years of experiences of law enforcement. You bring the chiefs to the table. There's another couple hundred years of professional law enforcement experience. We're not in the 1800s anymore when you had just the most popular person being elected into this position. You have professional, certified, career law enforcement officers that are getting elected into the position of the sheriff and being appointed as your chiefs. We're the maybe not 100% professional, but we've seen what goes on, know what's not going to work, and we know how to build a toolbox and fill that toolbox and be able to apply the tools, make our community safer.
Well, thank you so much. Sheriff Ferrari, any last words, any thoughts that we didn't cover that you wanted to cover?
Well, I think Tony hit the Sheriff Mace. He hit the nail on the head as far as our views, not only sheriffs, but as an association. But I just want to put this out there. We talked about the red flag law, which enables law enforcement to go and take an inanimate object out of a person that has been deemed a threat to themselves or others, just the object, just the gun, and allowing them or possibility of leaving them to their own devices to create some other harm, whether it's jumping inside of a vehicle and speeding through a school zone. What if we had a law that would allow us to take a person that was deemed to be a threat to themselves or others? What if we had a law that allows us to take the individual and get them some help? Would that be a great law?
I think so.
Yeah,
Well,
we already have it.
We already have that law. That's our point. Okay, 41-10-1 enables law enforcement to take an individual who is a threat to themselves or others to a mental health facility or a medical facility to be checked out to see if they are a threat. And from there, we can get a court order on that individual to hold that individual, to get them some help, and at the same time, take any weapons they may have. We already have it. Again, if they would just consult with law enforcement, we can tell them what we already have to work with, what we could probably amend that maybe not be working out real great, and what our needs are. Quit handing me a pipe wrench and telling me to go fix things. And we want to be, just like Sheriff Mace said, we want to be part of the solution, not the problem. But we are going to stand up for our citizens' rights. We as sheriffs take our oath very seriously. When I rose my hand and I said that I would uphold the Constitution and the Constitution and laws of the state of New Mexico, I meant it. Every political figure needs to revisit their. But when you're giving me laws that violate 2 out of 3, I need better direction. And that's where I look to the Supreme Court. But listen to us and take our experience to the table when you're drafting these. We'll be more than happy to be part of that team.
Well, I can tell you right now, I grew up with law enforcement people around me. Some of my best friends from childhood, and some of them are state policemen, sheriffs. You guys have the toughest jobs in New Mexico. So I would want to personally thank you guys for doing what you do. And thank you for standing up and speaking for all the sheriffs and all the people of New Mexico. And we'll continue supporting you and continue fighting wherever we can.
Thank you. And I just got real quick. I got to thank the citizens. Go ahead, Tony. I think I cut you off.
I want to say thanks, Jeff, for joining us, and Brett, thank you for hosting this, because it's important to get the facts out there and not the one-sided story that the citizens, again, we take our oath seriously. Not only did I swear my oath as an elected official, I swore my oath as an active duty serviceman. I have 2 children serving in the Marine Corps right now that are protecting the very rights that we and privileges that we enjoy every day. Like Shane, every other elected official, we swore those oaths on a Bible. My whole department stood there with me when I took my oath with our hands on a Bible, that we are going to protect the Constitution and the citizens of New Mexico. And we take that seriously, and we're passionate about it. And we just want to be able to effectively do that with enacting good laws.
And I agree with you. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone in New Mexico. We appreciate your service to keeping us safe and helping to defend everybody's rights.
Brett, thank you.
Well, Brett, thanks for setting this up. I think this is great.
Yeah, looking forward to do it again. If you guys have any updates for us, let us know. We'll keep in contact with you and hopefully keep New Mexico informed on any new progress on this issue. You guys have a good day.
Brett, I would just like to add, I know there's
sorry, go ahead, Mace.
I'd like to add that I know there's a lot of people out there on social media and a lot of people out there on Facebook and different that are watching this and that are going to be watching this. I want to make it known that both sides of this topic, whether you support this stuff or whether you don't support this stuff, or you just don't know a whole lot about it, reach out to your local sheriff, set up a meeting with them, come and visit with them. We're not bad people. I mean, even if you have an opinion that differs from what ours is, we're still open to have that dialogue, conversation, because who knows, we may teach each other something. And I'll tell you, the minute you think you know it all, that's when you're setting yourself up for failure. This is just because your opinion may differ from my opinion doesn't make you a bad person. I encourage citizens to reach out to their sheriff, reach out to their police chief, reach out to their local law enforcement officer, and sit down with them and have a conversation and have that dialogue back and forth. And maybe we can learn something from each other.
I agree.
Very good. Hey, Brett, I just want to say something real quick, and I know everybody's on short on time. I got to thank the citizens of New Mexico. And that not only for me, but as a part of the Sheriff's Association, you look at all of our efforts we attempted to try and getting to the table, but it wasn't until we went to our counties and our citizens stood behind us that gave us a voice. And again, that talk about the power of the people, and that's what it was. If it wasn't them supporting us and being behind us as elected officials, we would have never started any type of dialogue at all, although we're still working on it. We would have never got a phone call. So thank you, New Mexico.
I agree. Thank you guys so much for all your service and for everything you do for New Mexico. I really appreciate it.
And Facebook, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to click that share button and look forward to other webinars like this with updates and more news across New Mexico. Have a great day, and thanks for joining.
All right, Tony, we'll talk to you later.
We'll see you, Shane. Have a good one, brother.
All right, Mr. Apodaca,
Hey guys,
thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
No problem. The next time I get up there, we'll go have lunch or something. Tony, when you get to Albuquerque, I'll text you my number. Give me a holler.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Okay,
Yeah,
guys.
thanks, guys.
Talk to you soon. All right. Bye-bye.
All right.
Okay.